In the concluding pages of Charles Dickens' timeless tale, A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge, in a dark cemetery, clutches the arm of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, imploring, quote, "Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they the shadows of the things that may be only?" Close quote. Professor Dwight Lindley, on what is perhaps the most famous morality tale in the English language, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, now. My name is Todd Warner, and this is the Evangelization Culture Podcast from Word on Fire. Professor Dwight Lindley is an associate professor of English at Hillsdale College, where he holds the Barbara Longway Briggs Chair in English Literature. He teaches courses in the Great Books and in Victorian and early 20th century British literature, and has published articles and essays on John Henry Newman, George Eliot, Jane Austen, Gerard Manley Hopkins, and others. He and his wife Emily have 9 children. Dwight Lindley, welcome.
Thanks, Todd. Glad to be here.
Segment 1, A Man Named Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. These immortal words open Charles Dickens' treasured novel, A Tale of Two Cities. But they could just as well apply to the rising and falling narratives populating every work Charles Dickens ever wrote, from Oliver Twist to David Copperfield, from Great Expectations to the Pickwick Papers. Dickens expertly explores the vast sweep of the human condition. So, Dwight, I think the obvious question to ask for starters is, who exactly was Charles Dickens?
Sure. Good place to start. Well, this is a man who lived right in the 19th century, in the middle of it, 1812 to 1870. The most popular novelist of the Victorian period and of 19th century England. Also, probably the most popular in America in that same time. Very famous in America. And I mean, what else can I say? He was a father of 10 children. He had just immense amounts of energy for philanthropy and editing all kinds of magazines, and he just had 1,000 things going in addition to writing a bunch of books, and enormous books, as everybody knows who's ever looked at them or been daunted by them or tried to read them. People like to say, oh, he was paid by the word, which usually means I'm too chicken to try to read a big novel. But he wrote a lot of pages because that's what people did to entertain one another in the evenings in that day. They didn't sit looking at their phones or watching TV or something. They read for hours aloud to each other. So he wrote a ton and was just a hugely influential figure in the culture of his day, and one of the great novelists in the English language, and one of the great writers in the English language.
I love the fact that you talk about how long his books are. And it's interesting because if we look at a lot of the classics, from Tolstoy's War and Peace to Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, to many others, Middlemarch from George Eliot, it's amazing because if you read the Atlantic Monthly, or if you read the New York Times, if you read any number of different cultural or journals that are just reflecting on where things are from a reading standpoint, everybody's kind of wringing their hands that our college students just can't read these books. They're too long. And it seems like in many respects, and you're a college professor, you have to weigh in on this, but a lot of college professors have sort of surrendered to the notion that, well, I can't ask them to read this whole book. I'll have to give them excerpts and so on. It'd be unreasonable. And yet what you're saying is, it was just cultural practice back then, not only to read long books, but to look forward to reading long books because of the depths with which they explored human character. So just a little segue on this. What's your sense about the appetite for reading the long book these days, and specifically reading a Dickens work? What's happened?
I mean, it's a good question. We're much more used to visual stimulation now, and And our attention spans have been shortened, as everybody says,
Yeah.
and much more used to frequent dopamine hits that are given to us from outside. That said, people still like listening and listening to long form podcasts and
Mm.
audiobooks. I think there's a lot of appetite for audiobooks right now. My own children, they like to read, paper books too, but they're always waiting for the next time they can listen to an audiobook.
Mm.
Um, which leads me to think that we haven't lost our appetite for listening to
Mm.
big long books and a lot of words, a lot of text, but we've grown out of the habit of reading it ourselves off the
Mm.
page, and quiet reading and that kind of thing. Why that is, I mean, technology, as I've already implied, television, just I think a general habituation to having things done more for us,
Mm-hmm.
and not participating ourselves as much in the things that entertain us. We're more of a consumer society where we want to be fed, have everything brought to us, whereas books require you to do some of the imagining. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, like I said, I still have hope actually, because people like to listen to books still. People like to listen to Dickens still, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
But by the way, on that note, do you assign? I mean, when you're in your various classes that you offer at Hillsdale, do you assign some of the books that are tomes, or how do you approach the long
oh
book
yeah.
you want a student to read?
Well, every fall I assign Moby Dick, for
Mm.
example, and that's a famously dense and pretty long novel. It's 500 or 600 pages,
Yeah.
and people are really intimidated by it at the start of it, but by the end of it, many of them say, "This is the best book I've ever read. This
Wow.
is my favorite novel." I mean, it just really takes them by storm. And then I do, for an upper level English class that I teach every spring. I teach Middlemarch
Mm.
usually. Sometimes I've done a Dickens novel, but Middlemarch is 800 pages.
Yeah.
8 or
Yeah.
900. I mean, it's serious
Yeah.
brick. And yet, that's another book where people, you know, are dragging themselves into it a little bit at the start, and you have to get 100. Really have to get 150 pages for it to really get going, which is
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
hilarious to imagine.
Yeah.
But then by the time that they're at the end, that's another book that people often say, "Wow, this is my favorite novel now." Um, so those are two, but I do assign a lot of big books. Most people, I do also teach an upper level class on Charles Dickens.
Mm.
That's more for the few and the hardy, uh, who can who are willing to put down 3,000 to 4,000 pages in a semester.
But I imagine when they walk away, are they saying what you said? Boy, this is I'm sweaty from all the reading I've done, but I'm profoundly edified as a result of it. I mean, again, not that
Oh
they're.
yeah.
I mean, but I presume it's always like like you said, people need to warm to something, but then when they have a good guide, kind of bringing them through it, and they get to the other side of it, first there's conquest. I actually tackled this and did it, but secondly, I've grown as a person because of what has been
Oh, yeah.
conveyed, so to speak. Is that fair to
Well,
say?
and to realize what they're capable of. It's
Yeah.
just like sports, where when you realize what your muscles are actually um, able to do,
Yeah.
if and when it's required of them, and with the right encouragement and the right setup and the right community and environment, uh, to realize what you're really capable of is exciting.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people wish they could do more with their minds than they do,
Mm.
um, and just need to be encouraged and to be fostered.
Yeah. So you give me hope because I grumble when I read all these articles lamenting that I can't ask these kids to read these books. And I'm like, come on. Antonin Scalia tells a great story about his high school English teacher that was talking, who loved Shakespeare, was teaching it, and some people were grumbling in the class, and he looked at them with his white shock of hair and his pulsating vein in his forehead and his clerical collar on, the priest who's teaching the class, and he says with his Boston accent, "When you're reading Shakespeare, Shakespeare's not on trial, you are." I love that because we all know that when we've all tried at a certain age to understand these hard works, and then if we don't like it, we're like, well, that's just, it's the flaw of the writer. I don't like this. This is not for me, or it doesn't make sense, so on and so forth. And then you read it, like you said, you read this later in life, and you're married, you have a kid, you've been through illness, you have a new job, whatever the kid, you're just older and have experience, and now you reread it again. You're like, this story is the same, but I've changed, and the story is completely different. Because of what I've experienced.
That's a great testimony and a great line from that priest. On that last thing that you just said about it getting better as you get older, I'm reminded often of a line from Augustine's Confessions where he says he didn't really like the Bible when he first tried to read it. He was too much of an intellectual. It was not high style like Cicero and these other things that he was reading. So, but then when he came later to the Bible with the appropriate humility, he entered into it and realized it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And he says, Scripture is a mystery that grows along with little children.
Wow.
So if you go into it with the right spirit, it actually gets bigger as you get bigger. It becomes, it has more to give the more that you are able to receive. And, and that's, of course, true par excellence of Scripture, but it's also true analogously of good and great books. They get better as we get better.
Yeah. Yeah, so good. Let's return to Charles Dickens. Can you say a word or two about how some of his life experiences may have informed his writing?
Sure. One thing I can mention is the fact that he was in a situation of a lot of suffering in his young years. His father and his parents went to debtor's prison. He had to work in a factory when he was 11 or 12. And he was just generally had a serious amount of hardship and had to lay aside his education when he really didn't want to and work. So he was always very sympathetic, partially because of that and partially just other aspects of his upbringing. Very sympathetic to children. And this bears on his fiction, because one thing we see in A Christmas Carol, but really in all of his books, is that he sees a kind of wisdom in children and a kind of freshness and innocence and vitality, a sort of natural faith and openness to the supernatural and to wonder. Those are all really important in all of his books and his whole imagination. And that's why he was so entranced by Christmas too. It was his favorite time of the year. It was his favorite part of the Bible. Chesterton says somewhere that all of Dickens's books are Christmas books. And I think that's part of what he meant by that, is he saw something really luminous in childhood and in the way that adults encounter children, but also the way that children themselves encounter the world. It's just everywhere for him.
Yeah, that's incredible. What would you say? First of all, have you seen the movie The Man Who Invented Christmas?
I'm afraid I haven't. I remember when it came out, and I think I watched a trailer or some clips or something.
Yeah, it's very much a Dickens kind of, I don't want to say it's a biopic of Dickens per se, but it's clearly it's informed by a certain amount of whimsy and so on and so forth. I was just curious about how much of that it covers his parents going to debtor's prison. He covers his youth, kind of spending time in the factory and so on and so forth. I was just curious as to how much you felt like that comported with the reality of his life. But also Thackeray was one of his contemporaries. The
That's right.
William Makepeace Thackeray was one of his contemporaries. Can you say a little bit about what set Dickens apart as a writer from some of the many contemporaries in mid 19th century English literature?
Oh, sure. One of the things that really first springs to mind is that he had been poor and the rest of them had not. I mean, really, none of them that I can think of. Thackeray always had money, and George Eliot, who was not wealthy when she was growing up, still never really suffered from lack of money and then became well off. And again, I can't really think of any major Victorian novelist who really suffered like Dickens did. So he was very sympathetic to children, but also to the poor, of course. And that's also a mystery at the heart of A Christmas Carol, is the importance of the poor. Obviously, our Lord puts tremendous, puts a tremendous attention on the poor and the way that we're called to meet Christ in the poor and so on. That was also something that Dickens felt really viscerally. So he could kind of narrate not just poverty, but suffering and the challenges and darkness of that area of human experience. He could write from within that. I think, in a way that a lot of the novelists around him couldn't.
Were there? Let me ask you this: were there stories of his that were extremely popular in his time that haven't stood the test of time now, and were others unpopular then that are now more popular? Would you
That's a
say?
good question.
You know?
Oh yeah, no, I think it's definitely true. So Christmas Carol is 1843. A couple of years before that, he wrote a book called The Old Curiosity Shop, which was tremendously popular in his day. I would say it's not one of his best novels.
Okay.
It has some marvelous parts to it, but it was just famous, world famous at the time. So there's that. Others that were popular when he was alive. I mean, Nicholas Nickleby is his fourth novel, or third novel rather, a little bit before Old Curiosity Shop. And again, it's a good novel. I think it's a lot better than Old Curiosity Shop, but it's not very much read today. Things that he wrote that became more popular later. That's a good question. He was, I mean, here's the thing. He was just very popular. So it would be hard for things to become even more popular than they were at his time. But I will say Great Expectations, which is one of his most famous novels and one of his most often read novels because it's shorter, in the 20th and 21st centuries, was probably, I mean, that might be one that has loomed larger since he wrote it, or since his day. I think in general, though, he was so successful at the time that not much has really swelled beyond that time.
So let me ask this. Many people know about the David Copperfields and the Great Expectations and Oliver Twist and A Christmas Carol, obviously. Tale of Two Cities. Let's ask you, as an expert in this, to nominate what's the one out there that's kind of a quiet winner that people should read. Is it Martin Chuzzlewit? Is it the Pickwick Papers? Is it Nicholas Nickleby? Is there one favorite that you'd say does not get heralded but should?
Oh yeah, definitely. My choice would be Little Dorrit, which he wrote 1857. It was right in between Hard Times and A Tale of Two Cities, which people know better. So Little Dorrit, and there's also a great BBC adaptation of Little Dorrit from a few years ago. But it's a really profound work that takes place. The start of it takes place in a pandemic, actually. And I was
Mm,
thinking of it a couple of years ago when we were in the middle of the COVID craze,
mm,
because it's really a whole book about the way that, uh, well, about two things. One, about the way that our external limitations. The main characters in this book are in debtor's prison,
mm,
um, and so they're externally limited. Their bodies, they can't go outside to into the world. But the book is really about how you can be free on the inside, even though you're externally in prison.
mm.
And yet there are also really important ways in which you can be imprisoned on the inside, even though you're free on the outside.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it's about really what is true slavery
Mm,
and how
mm,
does it work. And he's just a really big believer that spiritual and psychological bondage is much more real and intense than anything that can be done to
mm.
you on the outside. Um, so that might all sound dark. It's also about liberation and about
Right.
freedom and conversion in its own way. But that's one of those. I mean, it's just an amazing novel
Yeah,
that
very good.
I think should be better known.
So let's talk
And
about
you can
Dickens.
start with the BBC if you need a good hook.
Good one. So let's talk about the Dickens' craft of writing. So as I've come to understand, you can correct me because you probably have more of an inside scoop on this. He followed a strict routine of writing from like 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. He processed ideas on long walks, but he's also a guy who didn't get so lost in his work that he didn't spend time with family and relaxation and so on. What's your understanding of Charles Dickens' literary habit of being?
That's a great question. Well, the first thing that sticks out to me is he was great at voices, and
Mm,
he was a natural actor. A big part of his secret as a novelist is that he would impersonate his characters. He would become them as he was trying to
mm,
write them. Um, there's an account given by one of his daughters that she wrote down when she was an adult, how she remembered sitting in a chair over in the corner of her father's office while he was writing many years earlier. And he he according to his daughter, he would um, start talking in dialect because all of his characters have different dialects,
right.
different parts of society, and he would start talking, and then he would answer that person, and then he would become all of these characters and be dramatizing it. They would
Mm,
kind of take him over.
mm.
I don't want to make this sound like something weird or
No,
kooky,
no.
but he just had this tremendous um, love of his characters, and he loved their peculiarity and
Mm,
the contours of their accents and their flavor and their background and the way that they imagined the world. And he could just get into it and really give himself to them,
yeah.
and so that's something that uh, certain kinds of novelists really have, and um, but most don't. Frankly, I think
Yeah.
that's what makes him so talented.
So how about let's talk about his writing style. So there's a quote loosely attributed to Dickens that has him advising writers: make them laugh, make them cry, make them wait. From opening hooks to ending cliffhangers, from riveting characters to entrancing settings. Tell us in your own words what made Dickens magic in his writing.
Well, I like that. Make them laugh, make them cry, make them wait. What is the secret? I mean, I think that he wrote for everyone. He wasn't, and he was a brilliant man, but he was not what I would call an intellectual.
Mm.
He's not a philosopher writing novels. George Eliot, which is the pen name of a woman, Marianne Evans, the one, very successful novelist, same time as Dickens. She's a philosopher
Mm.
writing novels, and very, very good novels, but they feel that way. There's a kind of theoretical substructure to her novels that you can sense as you're writing, and there's a kind of, as a result, there's a sort of framework and there's a kind of teaching to her novels. Dickens makes points. You introduced him as a moralist, or I think, or a moral tale, Christmas Carol, or something like this. He has points he wants to make, but he's not somebody who has a bunch of theories that he wants to download.
Yeah.
And so what am I going towards? He's really successful because he just loves people, and he gets really drawn in by deep kinds of relationships and situations and encounters, and he wants to communicate them, in ways that everybody, people of all kinds of, all strata of society, can engage. So he's really writing for the world in a way that a more intellectual, philosophical writer is not. So he was really, that's part of why he was more popular than a lot of others.
There's a Gary Salmorson, the professor of Russian literature out at Northwestern. He talks about how, and I love this in my medical practice. I think he's spot on. He says, no economist, no social scientist, no behavioral scientist ever understood human nature in the way that Leo Tolstoy did in Anna Karenina or George Eliot did in Middlemarch. And that all the efforts of these kind of social scientists to craft, a human being in their studies and so on and so forth, never comes close to these characters that are embodied in these stories. And to some extent, it's because, like you said, Dickens is talking about people's idiosyncrasies and their foibles and their accents and dialects and the way they react in this way, and they're heroic in this moment and then they're villainous in the next moment, and all about, and threading through this whole story of this figure is mystery. You can't completely square the circle as to how this person ticks, but you get glimpses of them just like you and I get glimpses of our family members, of our friends, of our colleagues, and our students, or whatever the case may be. So is that a fair characterization?
Oh yes, I think so. We humans are not ideas, we have ideas, and there are deep structural things inside of us that help explain us. And theories can help you see the truth about people and things. But human beings, persons, are so much more complicated than that. And all of the complexity of my life or your life or the lives of any of these characters in these books, it all comes out in the expression of your lived existence right now. And a great novelist sees all of that complexity in the phenomenon of the moment. The way that you handle this morning, all of the things you've got to do and people you got to talk to.
Yeah.
You capture the universal and all of the complexity, like I said, in that particular. That's the hard thing that art, like great art, really does.
Segment 2, A Ghost Story of Christmas. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Well, as you know, Dwight, these are the opening lines of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and it might be the oddest way to open a Christmas story in the history of literature. So let's talk about, why does Dickens want to assure us that without question, the miserly Ebenezer Scrooge's business partner, Jacob Marley, was as dead as a doornail?
That's a great question. I mean, there are many ways to answer it. Marley was dead to begin with. Um, I mean, three things I would say. One, this is colored by Scrooge from the start. It's a description of Marley. It's not a quotation. It's just what the narrator says.
Mm-hmm.
But we're already hearing a little bit of Scrooge's anxious consciousness that that is coloring this statement. What I mean is, why Marley was dead? Because Scrooge is saying that to himself
Mm.
to try to tamp down the weirdness of his experience. You know,
Mm. Mm.
he's especially in the first part of this book, he's trying to explain away the ghosts that are
Yeah.
appearing to him.
Yeah.
Famously, he says, "You're more like you're probably something I ate."
Yeah.
A bit of mustard or underdone potato or something like this. So Marley was dead. This is something Scrooge says to himself. But then the narrator, the second half of the sentence says, "to begin with,"
Mm. Yes.
which is
Yeah.
the funniest thing you could ever like.
Yeah. He's
Dead to
dead at the
begin
beginning.
with.
Yeah.
What the heck does that mean? So there's resurrection immediately.
Mm.
That there are powers at work here that transcend what what Scrooge can understand and the limits of his materialistic framework, and things that therefore unsettle him, because he wants to be in control and he's not.
Mm.
So I think we get all of that. We get humor, we get Scrooge's lack of control, and we get a sense of Scrooge's anxiety about the supernatural and about the life and death line, all of that in that first sentence.
It's such a hook, isn't it? I mean, you start this, you're like, what's, I mean, obviously we know the story so well now, but it's sort of like, what a great way to, okay, who's this Marley and why is it so important to know that he's dead? And I'm reading a ghost story. So there's something to be said that's going to come out of this. So I think it's again,
Yeah.
it's a great hook. Tell me, Dwight, what's the genesis of A Christmas Carol? Do we know what in particular inspired this work in his mind?
Oh, sure. Well, for years, as I already said, the Christmas story had been his favorite part of the Bible, and it was his favorite time of year. He already had celebrated Christmas in some kind of less prominent ways in some of his earlier writing, but more immediately, there was a couple of things. One, he had visited some poor communities, poor schools in the north of England earlier. This is 1843. This is when he wrote it. Earlier that year, he had visited some schools for poor children, and he had also read a big report on the state of the poor in England that was published that year. And these experiences with the poor had made him want to write something. We need to, he wanted to wake people up and say, look, there are people all around us living in extremely dire conditions. So his first thought was, I need to write a tract or something like this. But then as he kind of stewed on it and moved through that year, 1843, he started to realize, no, I can do something better. And if I do it in fiction, and it started to kind of amalgamate with his thoughts about Christmas. So I think there were some social reasons that, and kind of concern for the poor. One other factor, which is worth mentioning. I already said that he had a lot of kids. Well, I think he had 5 children at the time that he wrote this. And he just had a lot of mouths to feed. Some of his relatives were also really dependent upon him. He just needed money. And so there's also that very this worldly reason that he decided, I'm going to throw down another book. Even
Yeah.
though he was in the middle of a big novel, he was writing Martin Chuzzlewit, one of his long and somewhat forgotten novels at the time. He actually paused that and wrote this, just blasted it off in a month, because he needed an infusion of cash.
Wow.
It was all of these things. I don't think we have to limit it to any of these reasons. So
Yeah, that's amazing. By the way, you remind me, Robert Frost, I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was kind of just knee deep in this long work, New Hampshire. And I think he was kind of pulling an all nighter, which I didn't know poets did, but I think he was pulling an all nighter to kind of crank this thing out or move forward in it. And I think the next morning on a June day, um, what alighted upon him was 16 lines of Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. And
wow.
it just kind of was an epiphany almost. And it's interesting, kind of like what you said. Robert Frost's New Hampshire sounds like it was Charles Dickens' Martin Chuzzlewit. It was this, what was supposedly his magnum opus, and then he dashed off, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, which I had to memorize in fourth grade, to my
Yeah.
chagrin at the time, but to my everlasting gratitude now. And here's a Christmas Carol kind of that emerged out in the midst of Martin Chuzzlewit. So it's fascinating.
Well, I mean, I think that happens to a lot of us. You're focused on the thing that
Yeah.
you think is really important, and really, what ends up being important in the long run are these little sidelights that come in and strike you by surprise. That you didn't see them come in, and you have a flash of insight or an unforgettable experience. We all think we know what's going on, but we don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Providence is mercifully steering the ship uh, beyond our capacity to even understand.
Yeah, so true. So Dickens writes, quote, "Oh, but he was a tight-fisted man, hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as glint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice." Close quote. Wow, Dwight. So tell us, I mean, he's told us right here, but you tell us, who was Ebenezer Scrooge?
Sure. I mean, I would say a couple of things. First, just about the description that you just read. It's noteworthy that he's cold. Obviously, it's a winter story, and so
Yeah.
there's specific reasons for that. But Dickens really wants us to feel the cold of him personally. There's something cold about him as a person, and that's meant to be a kind of lifelessness in him, where he needs to have life. And so the whole story of A Christmas Carol is of his inner life waking up and kind of no longer matching the outer cold like it does at the start. The other thing I would say about it is there's a little bit of a Dante vibe there, because bottom of Dante's hell is famously icy.
Yeah.
Which was not the way everybody thought of hell
No.
in the Middle Ages or something. It's just Dante doing his thing. And of course, he wants to communicate, Dante, that Satan, who's down wedged in an ice hole in the bottom of the earth, is as far away from the warmth of God's love and life as possible. And so he's down there and kind of motionless, Dante's Satan. All he's can do is kind of flap his wings and gnaw on the sinners in his mouth and this kind of thing. There's a bit of that in Dickens here, in Scrooge. The lifelessness of him at the start, the kind of slow frozenness of him morally and spiritually, psychologically, is about his distance from the mystery of the incarnation and the call of God in his life and in the people around him.
So good. We first encounter Bob Cratchit anonymously in the first couple pages as the clerk. And Dickens
Hmm.
writes, quote, "The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire." Here's back to your coldness, right? He had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller, and it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. And surely as the clerk came in with a shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter scarf and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. Close quote. So we talked about Scrooge, and Scrooge being this kind of miserly businessman, the partner of Jacob Marley, kind of a lifelong bachelor, passed away from, or walked away from marriage years ago, kind of sort of friendless, lonely, solitary, grouchy, and so on. Who was Bob Cratchit, Dwight?
Sure. Bob Cratchit, a poor man with a number of children who lives in, okay, he lives, and I'm trying to remember the name of the particular borough out of London. It's Camden Town. That's what it is.
Okay.
Camden Town, which is interesting because that's where Dickens lived at a certain point in
Hmm.
his own childhood. And so he knew well this really impoverished region where Bob and his family live. So he's got nothing. And yet, what Scrooge realizes as he is given, given an experience of Bob's house, which he's probably never been to the Cratchit house,
Yeah.
in his previous life. But when he's given a vision of it by a couple of the different ghosts, there's a kind of warmth there in spite of them having nothing.
Hmm.
There's a kind of wealth in their poverty, which he doesn't have in his wealth.
Hmm.
So that's the first thing that sticks out about Bob. I would also say Bob has a kind of, he's a simple man. It says
Hmm.
something like he doesn't have much of he's not a man of strong imagination, right? He's, he's not been educated. He's had a hard life, a simple man. And yet he's got a kind of joy and a capacity to see the light in the darkness
Yeah.
that Scrooge doesn't have. This whole story is a light in the darkness story, and that's the heart of Dickens' imagination in general. Bob's already got that light, you know, whereas Scrooge is missing it and doesn't know that he's missing it yet.
But by the way, since you mentioned that as part of the, I love you just said it's the heart of Dickens' imagination. Would you say that the thread of light in the darkness is, I mean, is the notion of the light in the darkness a thread through almost all of Dickens' works?
Yeah, I think so. In this sense, not always in a strict, physical light and physical darkness
Yeah,
sense,
yeah.
but very much in a spiritual, moral
Hmm.
sense, and oftentimes visually too. He's really interested in the way that the warmth of divine illumination can break into the darkest places
Mm.
and the darkest milieus socially, and the darkest family and work problems, and the darkest kind of moral in prisons and so on. That's that I think is the heart of his imagination.
Mm.
And this is part of why Chesterton said all of his books are Christmas books. What happens to Ebenezer Scrooge here? His conversion is really there in most of Dickens's great characters.
Mm-hmm.
They all kind of undergo that breaking in of the light, especially in the darkest places.
Yeah. So, Dwight, let's talk about Marley's ghost. As
Oh
Scrooge
yeah.
huddles in his home, he encounters bells ringing, chains clanking, cellar doors booming, and staircases creaking. Which is, by the way, when one reads this, it's frightening. I mean, it's a frightening haunting going on here, and yet Scrooge spits humbug and poo poo Even the presence of Marley's ghost, he insisted the ghost, as you mentioned, is merely a figment of his imagination brought on by undigested beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, or a fragment of underdone potato. He just ate something wrong and he's got reflux and bloatiness, and therefore his imagination's run a little bit wild. Why do you doubt your senses? The ghost asks. Man of the worldly mind, do you believe in me or not? So indeed, Dwight, why is Scrooge so refractory to the ghost before his eyes?
Well, two things. One, just before I answer the question straightforwardly, that we should notice that Scrooge is kind of hilarious, even in the midst of all of his,
Yeah.
crotchety old miser behavior. It's hard not to laugh at this guy, even as you're like, wow, he's a piece of work.
Yeah.
There's a kind of joy in him that promises more than he actually has right now.
Yeah, good one.
So I just wanted to notice that. It's just
there's a twinkle in his eye. He's a curmudgeon, but there's a little bit of lovability in that curmudgeon, just a titch.
I mean, when he's saying these, like, he's blaming the ghost on a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of the grave about you, whatever you are. I mean, he's punning.
Yeah.
In a moment of haunting by a ghost. This is not a horror image exactly. There's a kind of play. Okay, putting that to the side, what is he doing here? I mean, I think he's trying to box in the ghost and explain it away, because that will give him a sense of control.
Yeah.
This book is really about a man who has gotten used to controlling the terms of his life financially and personally and socially. He's locked everything out. He's refused that early opportunity of marriage, that you mentioned, and so on. No friends and all that, so that he can have control. And it's of people and ultimately God breaking into that limited world and revealing to him what he, that he really wants so much more than that. But anyway, he's trying to exercise like his control here and put a materialistic framework on something that really does not fit into that.
So Scrooge goes on and he says, "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob." Business. Business, cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Dwight, say a few words about this exchange.
Oh, sure. Well, again, he's trying to limit Marley to something that he understands and therefore can be comfortable with and control. He says, you're a man of business. Okay, that means you're just this. You're this financial exchange and transaction, and so on. And Marley says, no. I was made for so much more than that, and therefore implicitly you were. It's another moment where Scrooge is being forced to realize he doesn't the world and the calling of human life is so much more than he has been imagining. His responsibility for all of the people in his life and everything that he's been given, his responsibility for the world that he's been put in, is so much more. Mankind was my business. Everything that's been put into your life is your responsibility, in the sense that you're called to respond to it with love.
Yeah, incredible. Hi, I'm Todd Warner, Managing Editor of Evangelization Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute. Word on Fire is a global evangelical community that exists to provide our members with the resources they need to proclaim Christ to a secular culture. Our award-winning quarterly journal, Evangelization Culture, is offered exclusively to Word on Fire Institute members.
It's a tangible representation of our mission and goal to lead with beauty in order to bring others to the knowledge of truth. Inside each issue, you'll find writing from premier scholars and inspiring pieces on literature, culture, and daily life from fellow missionaries on the journey to know and serve Christ. Get a copy of the current issue of the Evangelization Culture Journal for free by visiting wordonfire.org/journal. Thank you, and join us in bringing Christ to a hungry culture.
Segment 3. The Ghosts and the Reclamation of Ebenezer Scrooge. In Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, Marley's ghost tells Scrooge, quote, "I'm here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread," close quote. So Dwight, the ghost of Christmas past arrives and declares that she is there for Scrooge's reclamation. There are tears and laughter as Scrooge witnesses himself alone at school, the joy of his old boss Fezziwig, the bitterness of breaking off an engagement. The sweep of emotion feels out of place in the dour, diffident Scrooge. The ghost says, "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years." What does memory do to and for our callous, beaten-up souls?
Well, that's a great question. As I said, Scrooge is a very carefully limited man. He's put himself and everybody else in this box that he feels comfortable with. What memory does, to your question, is it's this path into Scrooge's inner life that he can't wall himself off from. You know, he can put his fingers in his ears and he can leave everybody else behind and he can kick them out and he can fire them and he can end the engagement and so on and so forth. But he can't shut up the voices inside of him. You know, in The Ghost of Christmas Past, which we get in Stave 2, they're called staves instead of chapters in this funny little book. The Ghost of Christmas Past takes him to see these former parts of his life, which are, of course, symbolically, that these are memories of his own. It's a way back into the world through his inner life, if you want. So what I'm trying to say is that for Dickens, and in this book, memory is a pathway back into the world that Scrooge thinks he's walled himself off from. And it's ultimately a pathway to redemption, you know, in a way that is a distant, you know, not intended by Dickens, but it is in fact a distant echo of St. Augustine in the Confessions, where memory is a pathway to God. Remembering his whole life in the Confessions, you know, is a way of realizing that God has been calling him through all of the things that happened to him. Okay, Christmas Carol is not it's not explicitly a kind of religious psychodrama in quite that way, but there is something of that here. It's a path that leads out of himself through other people and ultimately to the highest levels.
So I recently had a conversation with Robert Cording, who's a poet who was at Holy Cross. He wrote a wonderful book called Finding the World's Fullness. And one of the things we talked about, and I wonder if it applies to this, you know, story, there's sometimes we have a tendency to erect these defense mechanisms to prevent ourselves from suffering. And yet the suffering comes anyway, and the defense mechanisms have blunted us from the true graces that might be out there. So it's a double whammy. The suffering is unavoidable in some fashion, but the defense mechanisms have deformed us in such a way that while we still suffer, we sort of block out the grace. And you make me think about this as Scrooge goes back. He goes back and clearly he encounters hard parts of his life, you know, spending Christmas alone at school, kind of having a bitter breakup with his,
Yeah.
this fiance, if you will. But he also has these moments of great joy with Fezziwig, these moments of
Yeah.
great joy with friends, and his sister coming and saying, "We're bringing you home," and Father's so different now. And so, to some extent, my question for you is Scrooge, and I'm not trying to get into psychoanalysis and all this stuff, but is there an element of Scrooge having trying to wall himself off from suffering in a way that did indeed block him from the graces, and in fact, his defense mechanisms have become ultimately his own undoing? Without being overly analytical, but is there something to that?
Oh yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, look, suffering is the way that the most important things happen to us.
Mm,
They're always come with sacrifice, and oftentimes the darkest hours, and this is Dickens was really convinced of this. The darkest hours are often the times of the greatest depth
hmm
and the greatest encounters with transcendence. I just think that's, you could take that to the bank. It's just true.
Yeah.
Uh, so for somebody like Scrooge, who's carefully trying to control and preserve himself from all, I mean, from all of the hardship that comes along with responsibility for the world and for people, for somebody like that, um, he's really limiting his capacity
Mm.
to have them to receive the most wonderful goods um, that God has created. So, uh, just a couple of things that you mentioned at the start of your question, though. I think it's interesting that he finds a path first through having pity and mercy for
Mm.
his childhood self.
Mm.
I think that's interesting because that's the first thing that the Ghost of Christmas Past takes him to see is, look, do you remember how much you suffered back then?
Mm.
He can't engage suffering. He can't look at those things in himself right now, but he can have mercy on his own childhood
Wow.
self. In a
Wow.
way, he has to kind of learn how to show himself mercy before and
Mm.
open up to himself before he can open up to somebody else. He has to kind of treat himself like another person in a way.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think there's something real about that, and then Fezziwig,
Yeah. The best.
that's one of my favorite parts
Yeah.
of the whole story. There, it's not about suffering; it's about joy and wonder uh, that he had back when he was a young man. And if I could just read one of my favorite parts of that Fezziwig passage, is Dickens's description of the dance.
Mm.
And Fezziwig, Scrooge himself is, dancing as a young man, and he had his love interest there. But then there's Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig, who are these portly characters,
Yeah.
and they're dancing and they're having a great time. So the narrator says, to describing their dance, if he says a positive light appeared to issue from Fezziwig's calves, they shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would have become of him next. Now this is an absurd detail. He's describing this kind of large man's calves and the way that they shine when he's dancing. I mean, who would ever have picked
Yeah.
these things to focus on? This is again part of Dickens loves things like this,
Yeah.
little details that are somehow against the odds, luminous with wonder, you know, and it's in that little detail that he actually has his love for this man who once played an important role in his life,
Yeah.
his love reawakened, and which is really what's happening in all of these ghosts. They're all kind of awakening his heart, and through, yes, mercy and pity for the suffering, but then also wonder at the beauty, even of things in which there's no there, even as in things as traditionally, unlikely aesthetic objects as calves.
Yeah. This to your point, I'm so glad you like this part the best because I mean, there's part of me that wants to be a Fezziwig in someone's life. I mean, you think about it, a Fezziwig is an employer like Scrooge is an employer, and Scrooge is the antithesis to Bob
Oh yeah,
Cratchit, what Fezziwig was to the young Scrooge and his friend, whatever his name was, Tom or what have you. Um,
yeah.
and it's George Bernanot, who writes these very, I don't know if you read Diary of a Country Priest. It's one of my favorite books, among others that Bernanot writes, French Catholic, but they can be very dark, a lot of suffering, but profound strains of grace just pierce through this suffering and so on. And one of the critics that's written a lot about Bernanot talks about his characters being agents of grace. And I look at Fezziwig as being an agent of grace, that he's a person that demonstrates, to offers unmerited gifts to others, simply out of the joy of being and the joy of being in someone else's presence and the appreciation of the dignity of that person. And so that is such, I love the agent of grace that is Fezziwig. Now, on that note, that you recall, and this is one of the things I was going to ask you, the ghost disdainfully clips to Scrooge. I love the fact that ghosts sometimes use Scrooge's words against him. And Scrooge is now arguing on the other side, and the ghost kind of just sort of mic drops him with something that Scrooge once said, and Scrooge is caught kind of flat-footed. The ghost disdainfully clipped to Scrooge that Fezziwig hardly spent much money on the party, saying a small matter to make these silly folk so full of gratitude. So the ghost says, and Scrooge fires back, "It isn't that, spirit. Fezziwig has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in his words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." So I just, can you just weigh in on Scrooge? This is like, who's this guy talking? This isn't Ebenezer Scrooge, because Scrooge is all about how much that coal costs that you're sticking in there, and I can't give money to the guys asking for alms. What is Scrooge learning about the things that transcend cost?
No, that's a great question, and I think it gets to the heart of something right in the middle of this book, which is, the question of what is happiness, and what do we actually want in life. Scrooge thinks he knows what he wants. He wants money and he wants control. It's very external and material, and it's out there. Whereas the happiness that he's remembering now and reawakening as he sees Fezziwig and his own former life, that happiness is tied to immaterial things, and itself is immaterial. The invisible world is so much more important in here than, well, actually, I don't want to put it that way. What I'm saying is the things that he's learning to value again here are invisible aspects that are present in the visible world. Things that he can't just control. The things that Fezziwig gives him cannot be counted up.
Yeah.
And so I think he's really realizing how much he cares about the invisible world and what can't be just quantified. And that all of his math has not really been hitting the target of what life is about.
Yeah. Upon first encountering him amid a room filled with lush vegetation and lavish food and drink, we move to the ghost of Christmas Present, right? And the ghost of Christmas Present bellows to Scrooge what I always thought was a curious way to greet somebody: "Know me better, man." And so in Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead Revisited, kind of the sort of tortured Sebastian Flyte confesses, quote, "Sometimes I feel the past and the present pressing so hard on either side that there's no room for the present at all. I'm sorry, the past and the future pressing so hard on either side that there's no room for the present at all," close quote. So I've always wondered, does the ghost command "know me better" imply the need to live intentionally in the present?
I mean, that's a great question. I think that's very well said.
Mm.
Um, I think of it, and then it's also an interesting connection to Brideshead. I'll try to come back to that, but the first thing, yes, the present moment is calling to Scrooge, and the mystery of Christmas right now is calling to Scrooge through what is right in front of him. And if he first has to learn to relate and to wake up to the life of his past, and to learn how to love what has been, he now needs to actually learn how to open up to what is,
Mm.
and what's right in front of him, right in that narrow, that will of a wisp
Yeah.
present moment,
Yeah.
right here between the past and the future, um, which he's been closed to, really. The whole beginning drama is all about his being walled off to the call of the world. He can't
Mm.
hear the people who are coming into his life or take them seriously. His nephew Fred, all the beautiful things that he walks past on the way home, he can't see how attractive they all are.
Mm.
This Ghost Christmas Present, come in and know me better, man. I also love this line.
Yeah.
Is breaking in and saying, pay attention to me, hear
Mm.
me,
Mm.
feel you need to respond to the call that I'm putting on you right now. That and not just this ghost, but everybody he's going to take him to see.
As Scrooge then stares into the window of Bob Cratchit's family, worrying aloud whether Tiny Tim will live, the ghost hits Scrooge hard with his own his own words. What then? If he be to die, he'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Again,
Yeah.
I mean, just a knife through the heart, right? So say a few words about the systematic reckoning Scrooge is having from ghost to ghost.
Sure. Well, I like what you've already said, that the ghosts, all of them, are really forcing him to deal with himself.
Yeah.
They're mirroring him back to himself, um, and leading him to move beyond his limits of his previous self,
Yeah.
which is he can feel is not enough. Um, Decreasing the surplus population.
Jeez. I mean, it's
Here,
horrible.
right. So that earlier line from him, which echoes, you or some of your listeners might have heard of Thomas Malthus,
Mm-hmm.
this political economist from the 18th century who thought there's only so many people who can populate the earth, and then the poor have to start dying off.
Yeah.
And this is still kind of one strain that's there in Dickens's own time, which he has tremendous contempt for. So what does it matter in Scrooge's life? Scrooge thinks that that people don't matter if they don't have the right kinds of dollar signs beside
Mm.
them. What he encounters in the Cratchits is that each life that he's perceiving, including the life of the little cripple, Tiny Tim, have this infinite worth to them, which is profound beyond all quantification. And it's nothing that you can really reduce to stats,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? So the kind of mystery of the infinite value of the person, I don't know, that's the main thing I think that's breaking in on him here, that he feels and kind of, it erupts out of him to push back against his former self and these limits that he's put on things.
There is something to be said about, and you alluded to this earlier about, human beings are not ideas, and in a sense, the ghosts are taking Scrooge out of his abstractions, of his theoretical
Yeah.
conceptions of the bothersome, ne'er-do-wells that belong on the treadmill or in the workhouse or what have you, and he's giving them a tour and showing him himself, obviously, but and also the lives of his son or his nephew Fred and their friends and
Mhm.
the Cratchits and obviously his once fiance who ultimately moves and is married with many children and so on, and it renders his theories null and void because the reality just brilliantly pours forth and it flips the script. Is that fair to say?
Oh yeah, I think that's right. Ultimately, there's this divine mystery at the heart of persons, and especially the least of these, that Scrooge's ideas don't capture, can't explain, can't deal with. Um, and I think he really starts to see that with himself as a child,
Mm,
but then with the child Tiny Tim here, and then others later. It's interesting. There's kind of children throughout this book, um, you know, who come to him, and of course, this is. I mean, like that's really there's a close connection there with Christmas.
yeah.
Um, in a way, Christ is coming to him
Mm.
throughout this book, in the children especially, and opening up the door to this reality that Scrooge can't imagine.
Something I discovered because I was trying to decide whether I was spelling Cratchit right, and I looked it up. I looked it up. And is there a T in there? Is there not? And I looked up if there's a definition for Cratchit, and apparently it means manger. And I didn't know if that if you think about that. And I'm
Huh.
not saying it was intended, but the notion I think about that Christ dwelled deeply in the poorhouse of the Cratchits, or that ultimately was the Cratchit family was visiting the manger, if you will, for Scrooge. And I'm being overly clever here, obviously, but I mean I just thought was that by accident or was that not? So anyway, just something that kind of dawned on me. But
Wow.
is there something to that? Do you know or?
I have never I've never thought about it. Uh, I wouldn't be surprised as you're talking. I don't have time to look it up in the OED,
Yeah.
the Oxford English Dictionary, but it does sound strangely similar to crèche
Yeah.
in French.
Yeah.
And so I really, I don't know. I've never thought of that about that, but I wouldn't be surprised. Here's what I would tie it to, which actually kind of responds to your point with a different from a different angle.
Yeah.
Uh, in stave 4, and forgive me if you wanted to go here later.
No, go
Maybe I'm
ahead.
getting ahead of myself. But in stave 4, when the ghost of Christmas yet to come, Christmas future, takes him to the Cratchits a second time,
Mm,
because the first time the ghost of Christmas present takes him there, and then ghost of Christmas future. When he's there the second time, Tiny Tim has died.
mm,
This is something that could happen in the
mm,
future. And the family there is all sitting around quietly, and the brother, Peter, is reading the Bible. And let's see. They all sat up looking at Peter, who had a book before him. The mothers and her daughters the mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but surely they were very quiet. And then the boy Peter reads this out. And he took a child and set him in the midst of them.
mm.
Close quote. And then the narrator says, where had Scrooge heard those words? He had not dreamed them. The boy must have read them out as he and the spirit crossed the threshold. Why did he not go on? So that's what Scrooge is thinking there. We're hearing
Mm,
his
mm,
thoughts
mm.
through the narrator. I think this really gets to what you're saying, though, because we got the quote from the Bible and then Scrooge wondering, what comes next? I
Yeah,
wish he could keep
yeah,
on going.
yes.
That part in the Gospel of Mark, so it's he took a child, set him in the midst of him. That's Mark 9:36. Mark 9:37, the next verse, which I think Dickens's narrator and Scrooge is kind of leading us
Yeah.
to think about. And this is written in a more biblically literate time
Mm,
when
mm,
people could have brought out the next verse, or at
Mm-hmm.
least the idea. The next verse says, "Whosoever shall receive one of such children in my name receiveth me."
Mm.
That's kind of the hidden follow-up to the verse that's read out loud.
Yeah.
And you put those together, I think that's the heart of this whole book. He took a child, set him in the midst of them. Whoever receives them receives me. I already said this whole book is a kind of series of children coming to meet Scrooge. Children and poor people, the least of these, broken lives. And in each of them, it's God himself who's coming to Scrooge.
Mm.
And so Cratchit's Cratchit's as manger, that's something I want to think about. But they're definitely mediating Christ.
So good.
And they're definitely, I mean, what is Dickens trying to do in this little book? He's trying to retell Christmas, the Christmas story, in his own day, in his own time, and in his own milieu and culture. He's trying to tell it in a new way.
Yeah.
Because people need to hear it again in their own world. And the Cratchits are at the heart of that.
So good. I wanted to just an excerpt, and this isn't anything notable to the plot, but I just thought it was so lyrical. So reading Christmas Carol as opposed to watching it, I think offers a delight in the lyrical and poignant writing of Dickens. So stepping away from the Cratchit house, we read, quote, "By the by." Now this is when Scrooge has been. I think he was with the ghost of Christmas Present at this time. First visit to the Cratchit house. They've just walked away. Quote, "By the by, they had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow from Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice and sang it very well indeed. There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty. And Peter, the oldest boy, might have known, and very likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded and looked happiest, yet in the bright sprinklings of the Spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, especially Tiny Tim, until the last." Close quote. I can't help but lump Dickens in with writers like Shakespeare and Jane Austen and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, in writing that brings with it an apprehension of what Gerard Manley Hopkins would call the dearest freshness deep down things. How Dwight, did Dickens put his finger on what it means to be human so well?
Well, I think what he had in common with Hopkins there, although again less theoretically even than Hopkins, who was a pretty philosophical guy himself.
Yeah.
I think what they both saw and really tried to communicate, close to the same time. Hopkins a little bit younger than Dickens, is that the heart of the mystery of creation is the Creator, and that Christ, in the language of Second Vatican Council, Christ fully reveals man to himself. That somehow the face of Christ looks out at you through other human faces, and especially the faces of children and of the least of these. And you're going to see the glimmer of that transcendent presence, especially when you're not looking for it, especially in small things. Both Dickens and Hopkins loved little things. In this, it's like it's a kind of, there's a kinship with Saint Therese. They're all what I would call romantic. In a certain way. This is something that really comes up in 19th century Romanticism, that this idea that it's not in the big ideas, in massive processes and theories and explanations and everything. all like the enormity of the cosmos and everything. It's not in all of those big, glorious things that culture understands and can explain that you find the greatest transcendence, but in the smallest little
Yes.
things. William Blake talked about seeing eternity in a grain of sand and
Mm,
heaven in a wildflower. That's that kind of romanticism then gets more explicitly. I think it's presented in a more theological or a more religious mode in Christmas Carol, and then much more explicitly theological in Hopkins. But anyway, that kind of mystery of Christ in the least of these, in the smallest things, that's at the heart of all of those.
Leo Tolstoy, I think, tells a story about an artist named Brulyov who touched up a student's painting with just the slightest dabbing of paint. And the student
Hmm.
says, you've only adjusted it a little bit, and yet it seems so much different. And he says, art is where that little bit begins. And Gary Salt Morrison, who I referenced earlier, this Russian professor at Northwestern, basically says that history is not where people were slayed and wars were won, but where they were in effectively the little bits, the imperceptible kind of blinking back tears that didn't quite follow, or the unsaid word or the said word or what have you. And so anyway, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's such a great analysis. As we run kind of closer to the end of our time, I do want to say this one thing about the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. So clearly he
Hmm.
was specter like, and Dickens records, and again I read his own words. Quote: "The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible, save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. He felt it was tall and stately when it came beside him, and that its mysterious presence filled him with a solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. Close quote. Now, what's very notable about this spirit is he never says a word. And I want to ask you, Dwight, in the face of a ghost of Jacob's Marley's ghost, and a ghost of Christmas past, and a ghost of Christmas present, all of whom are editorializing and using Scrooge's words back to him and so on, you have this specter-esque, Grim Reaper-esque ghost that says nothing but walks and points. What's your sense about the role of this spirit being mute?
That's a good question. My first thought is that the past and the present have a lot to say, but the
Mm,
future is more mysterious. Just in our own experience, you can fill the future up with all of the things that you think might happen, but
yeah.
in the end, we really don't know. We we can say what's happened in the past, we can say what's happening now, but in the future, there's a kind of emptiness to it. So maybe that's part of it. Uh, a second thought I have is that the first two ghosts were really reawakening Scrooge's love, you know, redirecting him out of himself to other people.
Mm,
Um, they were doing a lot of that work. And they had to talk a lot in order to do it. This third spirit is leaving all of the words to Scrooge,
mm,
and he Scrooge now is called upon to act responsibly, to make his response, you know,
yes.
to the world. So maybe there's a kind of progressive sense that he's got to reach out and do it. Um, without as much external help and words from others. I don't know.
It,
Does
no,
that
it's
make
it's a
sense?
great. Well, yeah, it totally makes sense, and it's funny because as you read it, Scrooge he's much more forthcoming, and he offers more analysis, and he says, "I think this is what you're getting at. Does this mean this?" I mean, he's
Yeah.
it's sort of like you said, he's kind of he's unencased in ice. He's almost thawing, if you will, and reflecting on the meaning and the import and the ramifications
Yeah.
that
I mean,
yeah, please.
no, I'll just throw out one phrase just on that point you just made. He's re- he's reflecting on what the ghost is showing him, and he's naming things, and he's figuring it out. He's saying it, but the reflectiveness. He says a couple of pages into that stave 4 with the last of the spirits. The narrator says, nothing doubting that to whomsoever, he's following the ghost to see what he shows him. He goes not doubting that to whomsoever they applied, they had some latent moral for his own improvement.
Mm,
And he resolved to treasure up every word he heard and
mm,
everything he saw, and especially to observe the shadow of himself when it appeared. Okay, it's that phrase, treasure up every word he heard, which,
mhm.
of course, sounds like our Blessed Mother in Gospel of Luke, who treasures up the things that she sees about Christ as a baby and as a child.
Wow.
Um, uh, the finding at the temple. That's one of the places where she treasures up. She pondered these things in her heart. And there's one other place. Anyway, uh, so I just think Scrooge is there's all these little marks of his renovation, his remaking.
Yeah. Dwight, tell us about. Most people know this, but tell us how you see this story ending it with its elements of sin and penance, reconciliation and redemption. Is your sense this is indeed a deeply religious Christian tale and not simply a morality tale?
Oh yes, I mean I don't think it makes sense without that.
Mm-hmm.
Every year I read people writing stories about Christmas Carol, little journalism pieces, and they like to say, "Oh, this is really just this is not very Christian. there's no there's no gospel here. Uh, there's not a lot of Bible verses here. Although I would argue there's uh, the one Bible verse that is offered kind of lights up the whole story.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of people say it's just not really Christian. It's just kind of cultural kitsch and things like
Mm,
this. But I just think that's BS. I mean,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think um, I think it's not heavy-handed, but he really shows in all of these little moments that come together symphonically that there is something transcendent happening here that's deeply connected with Christmas and
Mm,
the mystery of the incarnation. Um, I'll just quote you one other line from stave 3 when he goes to see his nephew Fred and the games that they're playing at their house. Scrooge, gets drawn into all their
yeah.
games, even though he can't really participate because they're ghosts or because of the distance.
Hmm.
But the narrator says they didn't devote the whole evening to music. After a while, they played at forfeits. For it is, this, I think, jacks, right? It's a little kid's game.
Yeah.
For it is good to be children sometimes, and never better than at Christmas,
Yeah.
when its mighty founder was a child himself.
Mm,
Okay, if you're going to tell me that this is not about the mystery of the incarnation,
right.
I just think that's bogus.
Yes.
It's a new telling in a new age, for the modern world, um, of that old myth. I think that's partially explains why this story is so attractive. Like the magic of it.
Yeah, that's so true. Dwight, two last questions. How did you become so entranced with the works of Charles Dickens? And how do you convey his work's importance to your students at Hillsdale College?
Wow, great question. First thing I would say is George Eliot and some of the other novelists of the period used to be my favorites. And I still love George Eliot, and I teach her every year, as I said earlier. I thought of Dickens as an inferior novelist, I'm ashamed to say, in previous years, because he was not as much of an intellectual, and I'm an intellectual. I read philosophy and theology for fun. And so I looked at Dickens in previous years and thought, this is somebody who's not thinking the big ideas. And so I actually wrote my dissertation in part on George Eliot because she was more of a philosopher. Okay, then several years ago, after I had taught for a few years here at Hillsdale, somebody, I did some interview with somebody that required me to actually go back and reread A Christmas Carol, which I had not done for many years. And I can't really, all I can say is that the lights turned on. And this time through, this was, like I said, 10, 12 years ago, this time through, I just, the scales were off my eyes. I thought, this is the most amazing and beautiful thing I've read in many years. I don't know what I was seeing earlier on. All I saw many years ago was just, like I said, Christmas kitsch and and Coca-Cola Santas and things like this. Okay, so it was actually A Christmas Carol that first opened me up to Dickens, and I thought, maybe I've misunderstood this man. And I read more and more novels, reread a lot of them. And I started to see what Chesterton saw, that actually the mystery of the incarnation is at the heart of his vision of the human person. And his novels are all about, what St. Irenaeus said, the glory of God is a man fully alive. That's the heart of his imaginative vision. Even though he couldn't have explained that in a systematic theology or a book of philosophy, in some ways he's more precious because of that. Because he can give it to us in a sort of with a childlike openness. He sees further than his mind can explain. I mean, that's an amazing gift. And so that's what I've found.
So and that's and you're obviously expressing this. Do the students that you're teaching, do they come at Dickens with a certain reluctance and skepticism, given the distance in time and the thickness of the books, or are they famished for this when you first meet
it's a
them?
good question. Yeah. So to that question, I think that some of my students will have read and enjoyed some of his books. Maybe half of them will have thought, similar to me, that there's something shallow about Dickens, that gives it's like jolly old England and good ale and, steak puddings and whatever. But is there anything more than that? So some of them have that. But I think there's still some of them who already have a taste and a love for Dickens. But to a man, they really, as they're drawn into it, they just find this is going to be one of my companions for life. This is food for the journey. This is there's something amazing and beautiful here.
Dwight Lindley, professor, author, and celebrant of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Thank you for this conversation. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Todd. Thanks for the gift of this time.
So I've been thinking, years ago, when I first saw A Christmas Carol, I was charmed by the moral of this ghostly story. An old, crabby, miserly businessman torments all around him, has a reckoning with ghosts, senses the misdirection of his entire life, seeks redemption, and is made anew. Though Dickens wasn't Catholic, it is hard to find a story with more Catholic overtones than A Christmas Carol. And again, I found it to be charming. But as I've grown older, I've come to appreciate the good work that Charles Dickens crafted in an even richer light. Man, Professor Dwight Lindley reminds us, is not an idea. In A Christmas Carol, we encounter characters, as we do in the works of Shakespeare, Austen, Dostoevsky, and Tolstoy, in their richest and coarsest clay. These literary figures are gritty and crabby, earthy and uncouth, but they are also hopeful and kind, generous and witty. In fact, at one time or another, we can find all of these traits in the very same person. Man is not an idea. He is a vexing, wondrous, complicated miracle. But notwithstanding the myriad ways in which man and woman present themselves in Dickens' work, they all have one thing in common. They are beloved children of God. Whether it is the wayward soul of Scrooge or the tormented soul of Marley, the troubled soul of Bob Cratchit or the innocent soul of Tiny Tim, the incarnation, the reason for Christmas after all, was accomplished for everyone, including you and me. To be sure, our lives, at once blessed and broken, meander too easily from the straightened path, and we long so hungrily for home. Our restless hearts clamor for rest, and such rest is to be found in the Christ child lying in a manger. Charles Dickens knew that. As Professor Lindley tells us, Dickens, as Christian, was blessed with an exquisite imaginative vision, and at the heart of his novels was the mystery of the incarnation. A Christmas Carol tells us the story of Christ being born again in the heart of an old man who had too often been intent on crucifying him. This Christmas, let's contemplate the meaning of the incarnation in our own lives. Let us remember the gift of a God who was born to die for you and for me. And let us recognize how we are daily made anew through prayer, sacraments, and works of mercy. To steal a line from Tiny Tim, God bless us, everyone. And one last thing. Be sure to read Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol for its vivid prose, entrancing characters, witty riposts, and deep meaning. But also read G.K. Chesterton's literary criticism of Charles Dickens, a book which most scholars call the best treatment of Dickens' life and work yet written. Thank you once again for joining me on the Evangelization Culture Podcast. I'm Todd Warner, and until we meet again, keep bringing Christ to a hungry culture.